Good morning, everybody. I hope everyone can see and hear me okay, and welcome to today's first of the Quality Bus Masterclass series. We're looking today primarily at the DRT context and viability for areas to develop into the future and how we can recover post-COVID. Obviously, it's been a tricky area to develop in the past, but the pandemic has had huge changes on the financial markets that sit within public transport and the technological opportunities that areas have to recover. And we've got some really interesting panelists today to help talk about some of those opportunities, some of the challenges, and some of the best approaches and considerations around how DRT can be implemented. I'm Matt Smallwood, and I'm head of Digital Strategic Transport for the North. And we've got with us first off David, who is head of International Business Development and Partnerships at Padam Mobility. Morning, David.
Hello, morning. Thanks, Matt. Just a quick thank you to everybody. So Landor Links for organising this, Matt for chairing it, and Antonio for joining us. A little bit about myself. So I'm responsible for international business development and partnerships at Padam Mobility. I am British, but I'm based in France, and I've been here for about 18 months now.
Yeah, so why don't you tell some of the attendees what your background is and how you got into DRT?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a left of field person as it relates to DRT. So my history is 20 years in mobile phone technology and big data, mixture of big corporates and startups, launching them in Europe. So I've worked at places like Ericsson, Nokia, Navtech, a weather company, etc. So it's a mixture of mobile and big data. So that's my background. I saw a lot of my colleagues move from from the mobile phone industry into other industries and set up, mobile technology divisions. So whether that's in retail or for airlines, etc., etc. And I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to use that experience of working in mobile since the beginning, from Palm handhelds to mobile phones, and do something in industry. As well as that, so I lived for 20 years in London. Needless to say, I didn't use my car very much. So it was either public transport or my bike. As a person, I really believe that public transport can make a massive dent in things like the environment and what we need to do. So putting the two together, I found my natural place.
Brilliant. I think we'll start off with quite a large question for yourself, but what do you think the biggest opportunity in DRT is right now?
Sure. So I go back actually to my time at Sony Ericsson, and one of my bosses there said, you can't affect change unless there's chaos. And I think, that's where we find ourselves through no fault of our own. Obviously, COVID has really changed things up. So on one hand, COVID has a very negative impact, but on the other hand, it's an opportunity as well. It's an opportunity to look at how we do transport today. What are the changes we need to do? I think it's also an opportunity in looking at the changes that never would have happened if it weren't for COVID, or never would have got the light of day, to be honest. So I think that's an opportunity as it relates to DRT. So not 30,000 foot stuff, but as it relates to DRT. So that's part of that change in the chaos. I think it's an opportunity for DRT to find itself within an integrated transport policy, which is essential for it to be successful. It doesn't work as a silo, and to be integrated into the overall transport mix, to cover first and last mile scenarios, to cover scenarios where conventional methods don't work, such as rural, suburban, or in some instances they don't work. And also to look at the current transport mix and can DRT replace certain aspects? So subsidised bus services, can it be done differently? I think also as part of that integrated transport, there's something we call aggregated DRT, which means you have to have different service designs, different usages to access different funding pots to make it viable. So things like part of Section 106 funding for new developments, school transport, as well as your conventional DRT, which is of course digitalized now, which is the big difference. So those are the opportunities. There's a lot of them.
Certainly sounds like there are many, and hopefully we can start digging into some of them as the webinar progresses today. I think moving on to our next panelist, we've got Antonio, who is General Manager International and Head of UK Sales at Ticketer. Welcome and good morning, Antonio.
Thank you very much, Matt. Thanks for having us here. Really excited to be sharing this time with you.
So do you want to tell some of the attendees today what your background is and how or why you got into ticketing?
Yes, sure. So I work for Ticketer. I head the commercial team in the UK. I also have responsibilities on the international expansion of the business. Probably most of the attendees will know Ticketer. We partner with authorities and operators to deploy transit and data intelligence solutions. We are known by running ticketing systems and operational solutions across buses in the UK. My background has been in the industry of technology for transportation nearly 20 years. I've been working in different mobility areas like private traffic control, like tolling, like parking management and payment. Lately, more focus in public transport technologies and ticketing being one of them. I started in Renfe, the national rail operator in Spain. I'm Spanish, and I started there at the technology team, doing procurement, running tenders for procurement of access control systems, ticketing, passenger information systems, etc. And then I was, running or supervising the execution of that. That gave me the point of view and the understanding of how public entities work, and then I moved into the private industry of, I was working with a few technology suppliers in the space.
Fantastic. So we've got a wealth of technological and systems knowledge on the panel today, which is really handy for people. So I think before we kick off into some of the in-depth questions, what do you think the biggest challenge in ticketing right now is?
Well, there are a few. There are a number of issues and challenges that we need to address. Probably the overarching one is the simplification of the payment experience for passengers, and that is touching a number of things. But the simpler the overall experience is for a passenger, the more people you will get using the system. So that simplification ranges from the way that the fares are structured. It also covers how those fares are presented and offered to the customers, to the passengers. Covers whether you are offering pre-purchased tickets or products versus pay-as-you-go offerings. Pay-as-you-go offerings normally removes access barriers to the system. And that's even more important in a hybrid workplace that we are now living in, where there's less certainty about what the future travel needs are going to be. And of course, fare integration, which is a very, very hot topic. Fare integration across networks can remove friction points. If for one leg journey, there's friction points in understanding fares, choosing the right ticket, actually getting the ticket that you need before you travel, if you want to avoid passengers from paying on board. The problem only gets worse when you are having multiple legs, and I guess this is one of the areas that we're working with our partner Padam to simplify that experience across DRT and fixed routes services.
Brilliant. And from what we've both said so far, we're clearly at a point where there is a lot of opportunity, a lot of potential to start working through, and I probably imagine a lot of the attendees today are keen to start teasing out some of the details, how that turns into practical stuff. As we go along with some of the questions, I think it's been pointed out in the chat that if anyone does have anything they want to tease more detail out of, we have had some beforehand that we've threaded into today's webinar. But if you do have any further questions, fire them in and I will do my best to pick up on them and try and organically weave them into the narrative today. So I think starting off looking at that integrated ticketing piece that you're touching on, Antonio, what role do you think integrated ticketing has as areas start to work to improve and recover bus services particularly?
Yes, integrated ticketing is key. Is one of the main areas that you need to work on to remove those barriers to access the system. But it's not the only one, really. So there's this wider concept of network integration and interoperability. So you need to tackle the physical network integration, and that means that if you're getting off a train there's a bus stop in there that that you can go, and you don't need to walk like 300 meters to get to your bus. There's also operational integration, so that when you get off the station and you find that bus stop, there's a vehicle there, there's a bus there to pick you up and get you to the next leg of the journey. And yes, then integrated ticketing is a key enabler for that whole seamless experience. That requires single tickets or token if you're in an account-based context, and that will work across the entire network. As I said before, we're touching with integrated ticketing. We are touching how the fares are structured, how they are presented to the customers, what is the governance of the system is very important. How the revenue is distributed across the different stakeholders. Is there any level of subsidies in the system? If you look at other countries, there's an important level of subsidies into the public transport system. All of those areas are touched by integrated ticketing, but yes, definitely it is key to remove hassle from payments. I also like to remember that you can put in place all these measurements, all these integrated networks, but if it is cheap, easy for you to get into the city center with your car, you can park your car and leave it there for a whole day on streets. It will not have an impact. It will not have the desired impact, regardless of the quality of the service that you provide with the alternative. So it needs to work. Yes, definitely, it is. It's key to provide higher quality of service, but it needs to work in conjunction with restriction of the use of private cars.
And I think you touched upon some of the complexities in there around governance, reimbursement, and apportionment of revenues. And I think some of those things historically have been areas where hesitance or reluctancy has come from operators, be it bus operators and other modal operators. So what do you think can be done to start to compel and encourage those reluctant operators to engage more with integrated ticketing?
So there are a few challenges of integrated ticketing schemes that are related to technology, but it's more. So those can be resolved relatively quickly and easily. So it's more about the agreements with between operators and between operators and authorities. And yes, I think that probably reluctance from operators to share customers with competitors and maybe lose control over the offer and the products that they are offering is maybe a natural reaction so that you as a business will have. And I think the first thing to put in place or to do is, in my opinion, to engage in an open conversation that would include details of economics, subsidies also if they are required, how the risk is handled and managed, who takes what risk, and what happens when something goes wrong. That clarity and transparency is probably a requirement to start any kind of serious conversation. And then probably an idea is looking at what else has happened in the field in other countries, in other places where this has been a success. I remember when I started my career and was working for this operator, we were in the process of getting integrated into some metropolitan areas, and one was Barcelona. The case of Barcelona is very interesting. They started the integrated system in 2001, and if you look at the patronage behavior 5 years before the system going live in 2001 and 5 years after that went live, you see that the demand grew three times faster after the implementation of the integrated system. Then it went through the crisis of 2008 and spent 5 very difficult years, but now today they have grown the demand by 60%. So if there are public figures that we can look. So if you are looking at the patronage growth as a key success factor to measure, how the behavior of one of this scheme is, then I think we have examples there that prove that this works. And then also we can learn there are many other places that have gone through this over the years. There are things that we can learn from others. Operators also need to be engaged and see what the impact was for them, things to learn and lessons to apply in the UK.
Brilliant. And I think we did have a question in the chat there around blocker to integration technology, and we've touched upon that in terms of the historical traditional bus networks. But I think coming to you, David, now the same sort of concerns or hesitance exists as DRT is implemented. So how can operators be encouraged to start embracing DRT as a concept for integration?
Yeah, I think to quite a degree, we're going through a mind shift on DRT as it relates to operators. So I think we've got to establish some facts, which are DRT as things stand today does not fit within a commercial model. So we have to accept that. And then I think the factors that will encourage the operators are things like enhanced partnerships. I think as we've got to mention it. I think that's a key part of operators looking at DRT. I think in terms of the reduced patronage and the question marks over the subsidies that to keep the bus services, how can I put it, keep the money or the finances of the bus services as they were pre-COVID ticking, we know that's coming. Well, that's coming to a crunch, and it could be fairly shortly. So I think it's working with the operators to show them where DRT fits, where it can be cheaper. It's not always cheaper, but it can be cheaper. So we have an example in Strasbourg in France, where the authority analysed both providing a fixed line bus service and a DRT service for a particular area, and the findings of that analysis was in that case, and it's not always going to be this, but in that case, it was 3 times cheaper to put DRT in place. So I think that's a compelling argument, for an operator if they can reduce their costs, obviously. And then part of it that needs to be done is for it to be included in an integrated transport policy, and that's essential. So it's with the operator, bringing people to their fixed line bus operations. It's actually not competing with those operations, which is a key thing. So we have that functionality in our platform where you can have it that the DRT service does not compete with fixed line services, and we really push that because we think that's essential. And then it's, as Antonio was saying, it's about the fare structure. It's about integrated ticketing. It's about making it easy for the passenger to go from their home, say first and last mile provided by DRT, onto the structural transport network. And so the examples that we have of very successful DRT services are the likes of Strasbourg, are the likes of Orléans and Paris. So Europe has embraced DRT earlier than the UK in terms of large-scale deployments. And here we're looking at substantial scale. We're looking at up to 60% of the passengers then go on to fixed line transport in whatever guise it be, and things like that. And you're looking at monthly patronage of between those examples cover from 20,000 trips per month to 60,000 trips per month just on the DRT. So those are the things that, in terms of convincing operators, I think it's data. I think it's analysis of the service and establishing what DRT can do. It's about it not competing with structural transport. It's about, adding to or giving more flexibility to the structural transport, and then it has to have simpler fares and integrated ticketing.
We've got a couple of interesting questions in the chat, and I think one of them in terms of how you approach reporting in the context of integrated ticketing. Antonio, that might be around your area, particularly if you're getting reports out of ticketing machines. How do you start approaching the reporting to build that confidence in integrated ticketing?
So in terms of reporting, so I think that's the data, the availability of the data is the simplest problem to solve. The data is there. and it's collected. And in the particular case of the ticket machines that we have deployed across the UK, there's lots of data points that we collect every day on every service. They have GPS locations. They have lots of data points on them. It is more about how those agreements are put in place. What is the data that is shared across the different stakeholders? What is the level of data that is shared with the scheme, and around governance is more. So the data availability, technical availability of data is there. In every beginning of these integration processes, you will see challenges to share data, but in the end, once you are proven and once you prove to the different operators and carriers that there is a benefit to them in participating to the system and sharing some data that is relevant, then those frictions will probably disappear. That's the most common experience. But it's not a technical problem. Lots of data available. It's more governance and it's related to the agreements that are in place.
And I think, go back to yourself, David, there's an interesting question around how DRT can sit alongside historical community transport and how community transport can fit into that piece, where obviously they've somewhat sat in the same space in the past, and as services are under increasing pressure, there'll be more sort of reliance on that smaller scale mobility. How do you think those two align?
So community transport for us delivers an absolutely essential part of the transport mix. We have actually pilots that run by community transport operators today in the UK. We are also in discussions with the CTA on how we can work with them to, I would put it as bring some answers to certain problems. I think this discussion actually lends itself very well to the community transport operators, in that one of the benefits of integrated transport within DRT is that community transport operators can benefit from that. And actually they can potentially increase revenue. They can, I think it makes it a fairer fight for them versus the commercial operators in terms of delivering services. And of course, with that integrated transport and integrated ticketing, people can catch a bus provided by a community transport operator and then go on to a tram, a train, a fixed line bus. So we're looking at ways that we can, in what we can do and how we can help advance things. I think, there's a lot of concern from community transport operators in the sense that they're kind of being bypassed in terms of the funding, and it's not too clear on how they can protect their business, etc. Patronage is reduced, so we're working on specific things around that to try and help counter that.
And we've got another interesting question, and we've got a couple of things we want to come to, and I think we're looking at fare structures, etc., and the image of DRT here, and I think that's a really good point that's come from, I think, Martin in the chat, that historically DRT has been quite a niche means of travel. How do you look at not repairing, but building on that existing reputation and getting new users engaged with it?
So I think there are a number of things here, and I'll just highlight some. So we have a European perspective of DRT, and what I would say is that up until now, largely DRT has been associated with dial-a-ride-esque services in the UK. And in fact, I was speaking to one of the big regional transport authorities who will remain nameless. And one of their employees didn't realise that they had access to the service and could use it. So that's how niche it is. It's so niche that even people in authorities don't know that they can use it. And so it has been this niche service. I think there are a number of things. So I think it's been run in a silo, which we know doesn't help and doesn't allow the DRT service to be as successful as it can. So it's got to be part of integrated transport. Scale is another big part of it. So if the solution, if the DRT service is not of a, it's just not big enough, doesn't have enough reach, doesn't meet the demand, then again we're setting ourselves up for failure. So Scale is a big part of it. And then I think also just the operations of it. So in terms of, you may have had to have booked 1 week in advance or 24 hours in advance. And it's not wholly helpful to help people get around. We can't always plan, a week in advance or 2 weeks in advance or even a day in advance. So then it's cut off because you cannot book a trip. Whereas, so all of that's changed. So I think with the digital products, it's up to real time. So it can be a solution, that can be used all the time. We can open up the pre-booking windows a lot longer now. So some services in terms of pre-booking, you could only do it 1 week in advance. So I'll give a concrete example that was put to me. You're on the phone with your doctor. It's two weeks before the appointment, and the person cannot book that appointment because the reservations only open 1 week before the date. And all of that, we worked on getting rid of all of that. So you can book up to 1 month in advance. You can book up to real time. It's digital, so younger people want to use it. You can do all kinds of different service designs to target commuters and different populations and types of people. So now is a time where it can be used within the wider transport network to its fullest, and cost less.
Presumably that digitalization itself is a useful means of getting newer users engaged as well with the technology piece. But I suppose conversion is one of the questions that came prior to the event. Does that not create a risk for, say, visibly impaired or people who might not be technological literate to start using those systems if they're quite technological? Don't know, Antonio, if you've got experience with that with different ticketing medias.
So that's one of the challenges, main ones, because as a public service, we want to remain inclusive. In a specific case of DRT, I think, and David can probably build a bit more on that, but there are ways to access the services, not only via an app. So yes, we need to remain inclusive to all people. In terms of ticketing, you may have situations where it's more convenient for the system, for the entire network, in terms of speeding the services and reducing the cost of operation of the system, to incentivize people to use digital ticketing media like contactless cards or mobile phones, etc., so that people don't buy on board, but they just get ready. Pay as you go also, but that will not work to everyone. So you still need to be able to accept cash on board, even though you may have incentives to get that of bus, but you still need to remain inclusive. And in the specific case of DRT, I think you probably can build a bit more. I think you also covering what you said, that traditional DRT has worked independently and in silos, and separately to the rest of the networks. I think that's one of the things that we believe that is going to change, and we're working with Padam and partners to actually make that concept a reality of an effective integration between the two worlds, so that you have integrated ticketing on one hand, but also you have operational integration, and you bring that flexibility, that extra flexibility that you have with DRT technology, not only for the DRT pure services, but also to the rest of the fixed routes buses. You may have situations where you're running school bus in the morning and you don't have, but you can run a DRT service in the afternoon or on the weekends, and you can maximize the efficiency on the fleets. But yes, coming back to your question, inclusivity is key here, and in terms of ticketing, you need to be able to accept traditional and incentivize the new ways of payments.
So we've got obviously a few questions here around the fare structures, and I think there is the elephant in the room of the current financial position of transport in the country, the funding gaps, and changes to potential funding that had been promised and might not now be available. How do you see that working within the DRT space and fare structures around that? Is it a premium fare set? Does it try to compete with other modes? How do those two align? I don't know, David, do you want to speak to that first?
Yeah, so We have a very particular viewpoint on where DRT fits. So, for example, talking to the compete with other modes, we don't want that, to be very clear. We believe it has a part to complement the existing transport network. And that existing transport network may change because of these budgetary issues, etc. And therefore, the where DRT can come in may be different to what it is today and things like that, but absolutely not adding another layer of competition to the existing transport network. And that's so we come at DRT, and this answers actually other questions as well on this. So there's one about taxi type service at bus type prices, and is that sustainable, or can that be achieved without subsidy? So, for example, we believe DRT has to, in terms of what we do, it has to be part of public transport. So we don't come from ride hailing. It's not a one vehicle, one person being carried. It is a mutualized service where where it has to be optimized for bringing a number of people together. So in other words, we look at grouping rates, with a very, very close eye. So we don't believe that we compete with taxi services at all. Now, in terms of the cost, and should it be a premium service or not, I think there's a lot of work to be done in that space still, and a lot of thinking to be done. It's not clear, is my perspective. So in places where it can be subsidized, then it should be part of the public transport mix with, in my opinion, though with the equivalent fares applied. Now, if we have talked to authorities that are looking at DRT to provide a kind of a premium service. So in other words, an aspect of dynamic pricing. If you want your bus very quick, you pay a premium. And if you're willing to wait 30 minutes to an hour, then you pay less, etc., etc. It goes into quite complex things. So we're reviewing that, but the jury's still out. I certainly don't have the answers, but we are looking at it. But where there is subsidy, and in our opinion, so just to be very clear, today, with diesel vehicles and a driver, DRT cannot wash its face. I mean, that's as simple as it is in terms of the cost base. Moving to electric vehicles can reduce the cost base today, but DRT being either breaking even or making a profit won't happen until there are autonomous vehicles, and that's just the net of the cost structure we have today. So it does have to be subsidized. And I think we need to accept that. And what that means, just lastly, it doesn't mean that we say open the tap and send us the money. It is we work with the authority or the operator to really reduce the amount of subsidy that is required. So, and that's the key thing.
I think just to wrap up on some of the fare structures and funding side of things, the question here about ENCTS, and I think more broadly with some of the concessional products that exist and complexities around that, how do you see those integrating with, say, a DRT system?
Yeah, so where we have, this is a massive topic in our product roadmap as we speak. So we're working with a number of authorities on what to do with concessionary travel. So first of all, and that's actually part of why we're working with Ticketer moving forward. So the reason, so concretely, what does this partnership, just right, it's not a sales pitch, but just what does this partnership do? So Ticketer provide the hardware that allows ITSO validation on board, and therefore we can capture concessionary passes and what's happening. What we're doing in terms of our product is we will be making changes to our product very soon. So we're working with some of our clients today on what needs to be done. So it'll be easy to input your concessionary pass. Then there's a back-end mechanism in terms of validating that pass. And then that pass is part of our digital product for that person. And then, as I said, the pass can be validated on board, either visually or ideally via Ticketer's hardware. And then the second phase of this is really working on the reporting part, so that we can provide very clear reporting on what journeys have been done, by whom, to the authority, and so they can then reconcile with the operator as is needed, but with very clear financial information and transport information.
I think just touching on some of that stuff around the technology, Antonio, how do you see the infrastructure needed to sort of capture these variable different fare sets on vehicles and the integration piece with, say, the standard network?
Yes, very good point. The traditional way to, or probably the most common way to deploy DRT services will include a driver app that the driver is actually using to see what is the manifest, who they need to pick up and where and when, whether there's been a payment done, and this kind of thing. So what we are doing, and part of the agreement that we have with Padam, is effectively that integration into the ETM, so that driver app. The main features of that driver app will get into the ETM that is equipping regular buses, but also DRT buses. And so with that, having an ETM as the main device that is running that driver feature set, you will have also, as part of the features, the capability, the ability to take ITSO payments, to take contactless payment, to read QR codes, to take cash. All that flexibility that you will have in a normal bus, and that will also provide a more consistent experience to the passengers, that they will see these vehicles, these DRT vehicles and services as part of the system, because effectively they are integrated. So anything that you can take on a regular bus, you will be able to take on a DRT vehicle that is using effectively one full ETM, really. So that's kind of the concept. Also, we are working towards having what we call a connection protection, so that if you have a mainline service that is running late and there's a last mile that is covered by a DRT service connecting to that main line, we can send a request to that DRT service to wait for that line for connecting passengers. So all of that, we think that is going to help that seamless experience and that simplification of the experience for the passenger.
So I think what we've got, there's quite a lot of challenges around getting the fare structure right, the technologies and the funding. So turning to you, David, what sort of environment right now for authorities that are looking to deploy this and try and understand whether or not it's viable with minimal risk in the current context? What environment offers the most potential benefits from DRT, and what should they be considering?
Yeah, so a big part of this answer is specifics are all important. It's only of limited value, a general answer, but I will try and move it forward as much as I can. But the specifics of the area are key. But in terms of things that lend itself to a DRT service, I think it's rural or it's peri-urban is a good place to start. So as I've mentioned, in city centres, we're not interested in adding another layer onto the public transport, the Uber network, the micromobility, et cetera, et cetera. So for us, it has to be peri-urban stroke rural. The service can go into certain points within a city or town centre, and actually this is very important for increasing patronage, but it doesn't work in a free-floating manner in the city centre. So that's one. There are easily identifiable areas. So, for example, where today commercial buses don't run. So our DRT service with Hertfordshire County Council answered that problem very precisely. So there was a transport desert in part of Hertfordshire, and also there was a problem in travelling from east to west in the county as well. So those were the specific problems that we were brought in to answer, along with Uno, who work as the operator. So those are no-brainer kind of cases. And then I would say there needs to be an analysis as to, can we get to an aggregated DRT service? Because that allows additional funding pots to be accessed. So, for example, an aggregated DRT service is what we have with Lincolnshire County Council, where we provide part of the school transportation, and that plays a role in the economics of the DRT service and making it palatable. It still requires a subsidy, but it's about reducing that subsidy, as I've mentioned previously. We're also looking at so within authorities area, what are the section one, what are the new developments, and therefore can we use DRT to provide the public transport for that, and that obviously is another access to another funding pot. And also what we're doing is we are soon to be working on a dial-a-ride service as well as the general public DRT service. So again, that's aggregating another service, and we'll be hopefully launching that this year in England with an authority, and that's in terms of, can you pull together different DRT services and do you get economies of scale from it? That's and actually increase better the passenger experience. That also is another key thing to look for when looking for a DRT area. Now, in terms of specifics, so we have one of our partnerships is with a company called Prospective Labs, and what we do what we advise when we talk to an authority is that there is an analysis done on all the usual stuff which everybody knows, so socioeconomic makeup of the area, the current transport offering, all the usual stuff. But what Prospective do is they also analyze DRT and the impact versus the other modes of transport. So in other words, we can clearly identify if a DRT, in our opinion, is a no-go because it will impact fixed line buses too much. And also we can use that analysis to argue why DRT is a good answer as well in other circumstances. So it's really about the data analysis beforehand. It's about understanding what it is you're building on, if you like, and then it's a question of using that data. And I don't want to go into this too much because that's the next one, but the next webinar. But using that data to constantly evaluate what you've done, what you've done versus the initial goals, if you like, and how you're tracking. And then if things are not going well, how you adjust, how you change, what you need to do. So that data piece is a massive part in working out if somewhere lends itself to DRT or not.
And I think with we've got some interesting discussions around sort of legalities and things, but I just want to quickly just build on what you've said there, David, and go to Antonio around the environment, the technological environment that people might have currently that offers the best benefits without sort of to need to rewrite the rule book in their area. So if we're looking at quick deployments, what sort of technological systems would need to be considered?
So in terms of the, you mean deployment of DRT?
Yeah.
So in terms of when it comes to payments and enabling this concept that we were speaking about, provided that the vehicles are there, we're speaking of regular ETMs. We have one that is smaller. We call it the handheld, and is better designed to be fit in smaller vehicles that are normally running DRT services, but that is not restricted to that really. So you can have a big vehicle, regular bus, running a big device for regular services, running effectively one of these services. So quick deployment, once the vehicles are there, it's just equipping that with one of these devices and running the service. This is something that we do every day, and it's quite quick to deploy.
Just to pick on a sort of a tangent that's come up in the questions around sort of group faring, it's an interesting one. It might put it on the spot. It's quite, I think, a complex legal thing, and I've got a legal background myself, and I don't think it would fall foul. But I mean, what are your views in terms of some of the regulatory challenges, such as those that might be posed around DRT? David, do you want to hop in on that one if you can?
Yeah. So today we don't do group faring. There is no legal challenge as we don't do it. So that's as far as we've gone in our analysis, in terms of operations today, really. So what I mean by grouping rate is rather than group fares is actually having multiple people go onto a bus, and so the algorithms will work to optimize that. In other words, will allow elasticity in the bus schedule to have other people be able to put in real-time requests, for example, or to expand the number of people who will fit into that allocated journey time and stuff like that. So that's what I meant by grouping rate. Today, this will evolve. There will be things such as grouping rates. There will be things such as more interesting fare structures for the passenger that will be adopted within DRT, but today it's not there.
So I think before we start moving on to how you make DRT work building on those, I think we had a really interesting question before the webinar started around sort of pulling together a straightforward checklist that areas can start looking to pull together around assessing if DRT would work. How do you start pulling that checklist together? David, I think, do you want to hop in on that one?
Yeah, so we've done over 80 deployments of DRT, and we have transport planners and urban planners within the team. So we have literally a process which is that checklist, and we go through it with the authority to understand what they want to do, how they want to do it, does it work, that sort of thing. I would say on top of that checklist, and if there's budget, which is often the problem, is the data analysis part, which is key. That is a very important part of that checklist. And so what we can then do is, from a service design perspective, and also an analysis of data in terms of the population, in terms of the geography, in terms of the existing transport network, etc., we can then get to a very clear answer on whether that's an appropriate area for DRT or not. The list is actually a very long one, so I'm not going to go through it in terms of the different lines, but if people are interested in that, I'll happily, I can share it with them. It's not sensitive, so I can share it with them if they're interested.
So I think if we build on from, assuming someone has gone through that checklist and now in the position to make DRT work, I think we'll start off with some of the questions that are quite interesting in the chat around that integration piece with mainline services. Antonio, I think tickets obviously as an industry have quite live, really useful tracking data for network services. How do you see that customer experience of moving from a DRT vehicle onto a network vehicle working and dealing with delays or mishaps when that could have a huge impact on passenger confidence?
So yeah, absolutely key. So building that confidence is key. And I think actually that interchange protection, that connection protection, is going to play. I think that there's another question in the chat that is referring to protecting connections from DRT to main lines, and probably that's not that relevant, because you will expect a main line to be more frequent. So it's not a big deal, should not be a big deal that you miss that connection, because in a reasonable amount of time you will have another service coming, another bus coming, as opposed to the other way around, where if you miss that connection, you're going to probably have to request another service that's going to cost more money to deploy, etc. So yes, definitely key to build that confidence, at least in the first stages of the deployment of the system. David, you have more experience than I on DRT deployment, so probably you can add here. But I think in some of our conversations, you were mentioning the fact that you deploy DRT services and new services in parallel to existing fixed route services to build that confidence. And once you have built that confidence, then you are in a position to do changes in the fixed route network.
Yeah, so just completing that. So we've actually learned from authority customers on this one. So if you take away a fixed line bus for whatever reason and you put a DRT service in, it's deemed by people that you're taking something away. That doesn't matter whether it's reality or not. That's how it's perceived. So our our authority customers who have a lot of experience in DRT, so Lincolnshire County Council is one, work on a method where for 1 month you have both services running in parallel, and you're able to transition people over to the DRT service, and then it really isn't perceived as taking something away. It's perceived as something that either replaces a service or delivers something better, depending that obviously is a contextual thing. But you take away the issues and the pain of people complaining that you've taken something away. So that's one thing. Just coming back to in terms of the DRT and fixed line bus services integration. So today, what we do is we run what we call the feeder DRT model, which means it takes into account the schedule. So this is a theoretical schedule of a fixed line bus, and coordinates the DRT bus arriving, X number of minutes to be defined with the authority before that bus is scheduled to depart. What we're also doing, so we've been acquired by Siemens, which most people will know, in May of last year. We're working with them on how to integrate real-time information. So therefore we can get that real-time information. So if there's a delay on the fixed line bus, then we'll know it. And then through our partnership with Ticketer, that connection protection mechanism will allow us to ensure that people can make that transition or that transfer. We're also working on things such as, with prospective labs, we're looking at things such as the elasticity that is there in a fixed line bus schedule, and how can you better coordinate. So what we've done is kind of it's the initial phases of that integration, and now we're looking at really optimizing and making it much better for the passenger, but also the operator, through that elasticity that is there in the fixed line bus schedule. And how do you coordinate and how do you integrate the DRT service with it? So that's not for today, but that's something we're looking at, and how can we improve things?
It sounds as though, it harks back to your initial point that the integration rather than a silo approach to DRT is key, and particularly with the improvements in sort of open data and data quality from fixed line bus services and other modes, really creates an opportunity for authorities to start putting those together and getting a cohesive approach to them. So I think one of the things that came up before the webinar, just put yourselves, Antonio, around fraud prevention in the space of DRT. When you've got all these technologies, how do you prevent sort of it being misused or fraudulently accessed?
Yeah, so normally in DRT services, you will have a pre-booked service or a space, so that who is coming and when, and that passenger is gonna jump on the bus. So that's one area that minimizes the risk of fraud. But then you may want to allow walk-up sales, and that gets you into the space of ticketing, mobile ticketing, and in terms of mobile ticketing fraud, I think there is currently a reasonable good level of security measures to prevent fraud. So if you speak about QR codes that are the most popular ticket media that is used in mobile apps, if you combine dynamic barcodes with automatic hold listing of single-use barcodes, and you also combine that with anti-passback measures that's normally used in fixed routes, I think you have a very secure ticketing kind of system, and you will not see a lot of fraud in that space. What we are doing at Ticketer is that on top of that, we are moving the QR code generation to an API, so that we every time that a ticket needs to be generated for any of our partners, including Padam, there will be a call to an API so that we have control of that generation, so that there's an extra layer of security on that. But having those basic measures in place, I don't think there is a specific risk associated to DRT when it comes to ticketing.
I think this is a theme that's sort of cropped up in the chat and in some of the questions beforehand. It's quite technical one around how BSOG will work with DRT. And I don't know, David, do you have any views around how BSOG and any further guidance from the DFT and how it applies to DRT?
So remind me what BSOG is actually.
Bus Services Operator Grant. I believe it's linked with fuel, but I'm happy to be corrected on that one.
Okay, so I'm going to have to say I don't know about that. So
it's I believe it's a funding element that comes from a local authority and passported on to provider of a emergency bus service. But we'll part that one, and if someone has that question around it, potentially we can take that offline for them. I think moving on from that, as we start nearing sort of the end of the webinar, I think it's a good opportunity to start putting together all of those thoughts and how you start measuring the viability and success of a DRT scheme. So I think, David, what do you think the ideal deployment would look like, taking into effect some of these questions around integration between mainline DRT, the financial risks, etc.?
Yeah, so that is a question I can answer this time, so that's good news. In terms of what success looks like, so it's working with the authority and or the operator on really defining the service so that it contributes to the overall public transport network. So in our opinion, integrated transport, and with integrated transport ticketing as well. And then it's really about using DRT as a tool to deliver public transport to where it's not possible or very hard or very costly by traditional methods. I think there has to be scale in terms of the service and the patronage. And the reason for that is you then get to a cost per trip that's digestible. So that, in the end, the cost per trip is the be all and end all for us. So it's about how small can that cost per trip be, and therefore, obviously taking as little subsidy as possible. It would still take subsidy, but taking as little subsidy as possible. And then you couple that with the feedback you get from the passengers. So the digital channels give you, obviously, it's an open door to passengers either saying thank you or complaining. It's really analysing that operational cost effectiveness versus the service you're delivering to the passengers. So therefore, you have to have that low cost per trip, but you also have to have a high score in terms of passenger feedback.
I think building on that passenger feedback, Antonio, how would you envisage that customer journey from engaging with that initial DRT going through to their final destination, from technological touch points, experience, etc.?
So basically you need to look at that experience, as an experience that have probably 3-4 different elements. So one is the discovery, and again, the discovery of the journey options need to include, both fixed lines and, the traditional public transport as we know it, and the new modes, and part of those new modes, we find DRT. So definitely needs to be part of the discovery phase. Then, in particular, DRT requires booking as part of the service that is provided. So that needs to be embedded. And we look at this with the variability of the offer, in particular DRT. We need to think about having a digital experience there for those that don't have that those capabilities, that don't want to use digital tools. Then we need to provide an alternative. But in terms of those using the digital alternatives, this is by definition a service that will be provided through an app, through a mobile phone. They'll have that capability to book that complete journey for, including the DRT and the fixed routes. They will be able to buy a single ticket covering however many different legs the journey will have. And then they'll have a single validation kind of experience across the entire journey. We could also add layers of complexity here, thinking about account-based experience, so expanding that coverage of different modes. But the simplest way of looking at that will be those 3-4 elements: journey discovery, booking, and payment and validation of the tickets or tokens from the device, from the single device, single ticket across all the different legs of the journey.
Just one last point on that. We all focus on the digital aspect, and that's right, because it is where the volume is, and it's about, as we said, moving DRT to have different people using it. But I think one thing on the experience side, which is very important, is on the accessibility front. So, for example, things that DRT can do. So you have multiple ways to book it, including call centers. So, for example, we've heard visually impaired earlier in the session. So call centers are absolutely part of the mix. Then the driver receives instructions and will know that that person has an accessibility problem or issue and what that is. So, for example, can help them board, will understand that there's a guide dog, all kinds of different things like that. And then last of all, is in terms of the service design. So when we have a public transport DRT service, which is free floating, stop to stop, etc., you can have an overlay, which is a door-to-door service for specific people. So, for example, we do that when it's to answer running a service that requires accessibility. You can have for certain people, it's permission based, but you can have for certain people, they get picked up at their door. So again, that's another way, and I think that's very important in terms of the experience as well.
So I think we are running short of time, I think, now, but I think what we've heard today has been really interesting in terms of sort of the background and context of where integrated ticketing is, and the opportunities and some of the challenges that sit with how DRT can fit into those. And I think what's come from this quite clearly is that technology and the systems around that are a real key enabler for that integration piece, for that customer journey, and for, I think, some of those disruption messaging things people touched upon, how you build that confidence. Obviously, some of the questions still exist around how funding sits, be it grant funding from BSOG, National Bus Strategy funding, and financial viability going forward. But I think that's been a really interesting session, and I hope people today have found that really beneficial and handy. And I think a couple of people have asked for follow-ups with people. Obviously, this, I think, is one of a series for the Quality Bus Masterclass. And I think you can see on the screen now details of the next webinar, which is obviously going to build on some of the stuff today to see how that data and that technological systems can start enabling and increase that success. So thanks everyone for joining today. Thank you for the panel, and I hope everyone found that informative.